Welcome to this review by your boy Sponge on Mistfall Hunters. Mistfall Hunter is a dark fantasy action RPG that mixes Souls-like style combat with the high-risk gameplay loop of an extraction game. The game is set in Weaverreach, a world shattered after a catastrophic war between the gods. With the gods gone, their blood has become the Gilden Mist, a mysterious and corrupting force that has spread across the land, twisting creatures and threatening what remains of civilization. You play as a guild hunter, one of the fallen heroes brought back to life by a fair maiden. Your job is to venture into the mist, gather valuable resources, fight the creatures and other hunters standing in your way, and somehow make it back alive. And that's really the foundation of Mistfall Hunter. Go in, get stronger, get the loot, and get out before the world or another player kills you. One of the first major decisions you'll make is choosing your class. Mistfall Hunter currently gives players 6 different classes, each designed around a different type of playstyle. Mercenary is the warrior type traditional frontline fighter. They're built around close range melee combat using sword and shield or a two-handed hammer. The sorcerer brings magic into the equation. Rather than relying on conventional weapons, it uses spells and abilities to deal damage and control enemies. The Black Arrow is your dedicated ranged combat specialist. The class is about keeping a distance, picking targets and controlling the battle from afar. The Shadow Strix, the rogue type class relying on quick paced burst damage. The Seer can be used as a support with a small heal or become a menace with AoE damage and close combat. It offers other options for players who don't necessarily want to rely purely on brute force. And last of all, the Withered Knight, wielding a two-handed greatsword for the DPS side of it, or a polearm and shield for a more defensive approach. Before you head into Weaverreach, there is also a character creator. Now, it isn't going to compete with some of the more elaborate character creators we've seen in other RPGs. The variety is fairly limited, but I actually think there's enough here to give players a reasonable amount of freedom to create a character that feels like their own. You can make choices around your character's appearance rather than simply being handed a complete predefined protagonist. It's not the deepest system, but it does its job, and honestly, when most of your time is going to be spent covered in armour, fighting monsters in the mist, character creation probably isn't that big of a deal. The camp is essentially your home base between expeditions, and as you play, you're collecting materials and resources that can be put back into upgrading different facilities. And this is something I actually like because your progression isn't entirely tied to whatever gear you happen to extract with. You're also gradually building up your camp, which in turn makes your future runs easier. You've got things like the Glyden Blood Pool, which expands your currency capacity and unlocks additional character creation options, as well as the Warehouse, which gives you more storage space for all the gear and materials you're inevitably going to start hoarding. There's also the Shop, which can be upgraded to provide access to better equipment, while the Auction House gives you more trading options as you progress. And then you've got the Tavern, which ties to the game's buff system, giving you another reason to invest in your camp rather than simply treating it as a menu screen. And there's Blacksmith, where you can craft gear and gems. Also, there's a training ground where you can practice your build against AI if you've made a few tweaks to your talent point tree. Each class also has its own set of talent point options for the weapons your class uses, which gives you yet another opportunity to customize how you want to play. You have 8 skill points to allocate, meaning you can't simply unlock everything. Instead, you have to make some choices. Do you focus on improving your damage, or do you invest in survivability? This is a nice little system because it encourages you to think about the kind of character you actually want to build rather than simply unlocking every ability available. And if you don't like your choice, it is free to reset and try something different. The 8-point limit means you have to make decisions and try to build the class around your preferred playstyle. At launch, Mistfall Hunters gives players 2 maps to explore, each offering its own environments, enemies and opportunities. The first map, Hallowgrave, acts as a relatively accessible introduction to the world. It gives you room to learn the game systems, understand enemies' behaviour and familiarise yourself with the extraction mechanics, but it still contains enough threats and objectives to keep you on your toes. The second map, Brandergard, pushes things further. The environment is more dangerous, encounters can be more challenging, and the more reason to think carefully about how far into the map you want to venture. Having 2 maps at launch gives the game a reasonable starting foundation, although this is another area where future content is going to be extremely important. For an extraction game, players are going to want new locations, new enemies, new objectives and new reasons to keep coming back. Currently, you can either choose to enter the raids as a solo or a trio, and the experience changes quite dramatically depending on which you choose. Playing solo makes every decision more important. There's nobody there to revive you, cover your back or deal with an enemy while you escape. In a trio, things become much more chaotic, but having teammates opens up opportunities for coordinated attacks, revives and different class combinations. It also makes PvP encounters considerably more interesting. A fight against another trio can quickly turn into complete chaos, but the game gives you a fair warning as other players' footsteps are easily heard. There are also various optional tasks scattered around the maps that are a first come first served basis. This means you are more likely to meet other like-minded players trying to get there first to accept the task, which once completed offers you a reward. It's not just regular enemies you need to worry about. There are elite monsters scattered throughout the maps that pose a much greater threat than standard enemies. Then you have the map bosses. These encounters provide some of the biggest PvE challenges during a run and offer much greater rewards for players willing to take the risk. But above all that, there is the Mistlord, which I haven't come across yet. This is where the PvE side of Mistfall Hunters really comes together. Taking on something like this isn't simply about having the best equipment. You need to understand your class, manage your resources, work with your team if you're playing in trios, and most importantly, survive long enough to actually claim the reward. One of the more interesting things you'll encounter to obtain loot while exploring the maps are special chest locations. Some are locked behind magic walls where you need keys to access them, others are locked behind monsters you need to eliminate before being granted access to open them. Killed by a player? Tough luck. But death is obviously a major concern in an extraction game. But Mistfall Hunter has an interesting mechanic that gives you a second chance. If you're killed by an NPC monster, you have access to a one-time revival system. However, you don't simply respawn exactly where you died. You have to locate and retrieve your body. So rather than completely ending the run, the game gives you one opportunity to recover from this mistake. But that recovery itself becomes another objective. You have to make your way back to where you died, find your body and retrieve what you can. So where does that leave Mistfall Hunter? I think it's a very promising foundation. It's taking familiar ideas, extraction gameplay, action combat, RPG progression and PvPvE encounters and putting them together in a dark fantasy setting that gives the game its own atmosphere. It's not perfect, the game character creation is limited, there are only 2 maps at launch, the number of tasks is relatively modest and the slow terrain traversal can occasionally test your patience. But the important thing is that underneath those limitations is a gameplay loop that works. It's a game with a solid foundation rather than a finished masterpiece, but it's a foundation that has plenty of potential. If the developers continue expanding the maps, enemies, objectives and progression systems, there's a lot of room for this game to grow. So while I wouldn't say Mistfall Hunter is going to be for everyone, if you're a fan of action RPG combat, dark fantasy and extraction games, there's definitely something here worth checking out. Thank you for tuning in and see you out there, Guild Hunters.